This is the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast, where we have conversations with everyday martial artists about their histories and how martial arts influence their daily lives. You are listening to the abbreviated version of this podcast, which is the first 20 minutes or so of the show. Please consider supporting the show by subscribing on our Patreon page, www.patreon.com/MALMAG, and for about the price of one coffee shop coffee per month, you can get access to 4 new podcasts each month, 1 week before their YouTube release dates. You also have access to all of our existing shows, which at this point is about 100 hours of shows for you to enjoy. Individual shows can be purchased at our Gumroad page. That is malmag.gumroad.com. If you're looking for some sticks for FMA, some cool t-shirts, or even a course on Dos Manos, have a stop by martialartslifestylemagazine.com and click on the store tab or on the courses tab for that course. This week I get on Zoom and I connect to Cleveland and I talk with my good friend David Hearst. We talk about how he got involved in martial arts, seeking out Jeet Kune Do, studying with Rick Fay and the Minnesota Kali Group, bringing it home to Cleveland, and balancing a professional career and running a martial arts school, and much more. Sit back and enjoy. Welcome to the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast. Today I'm on Zoom connecting to Cleveland and talking with an old friend who I met through the Inosanto family. I want to say I think I first met you back in maybe Waterloo when I was traveling with Guru.
No, I think it was Michigan. It was with
Michigan.
The hatches.
Okay.
Yeah, you were
one of those places. Yeah, one of those places. Yeah. Midwest. Yeah. Okay, that's right. In the big gym. With the echoes. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's in Michigan, in Detroit, right. Very cool. David Hearst, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here.
You're welcome. And then, of course, I got to just see you recently here in the October camp at the Academy.
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was, I look forward to that every year. And man, this year was a blast.
Yeah, it was a good group. Kind of a fun time. You know, it's different stuff. Guru goes into and there's times, especially like that kind of last day was kind of fun as he went into some different stuff. You know, it's like he'll get an idea and then like, oh, all right, we're off on a tangent. This is kind of fun.
Yeah, it's always fun for me because I get to see like a bunch of new things I get to then work on throughout the year and bring back to my students. And I feel like this year in particular, I was every morning just typing tons and tons of notes and, messaging my senior students and saying like, oh, I can't wait till I get back, guys. You're going to love this stuff. So it was definitely a great camp.
Man. So how is that for you? Like, I hope it isn't like one of these situations where I know it would be for me. We're like, look out, I've got all this cool stuff coming back. And then I'll get there. And what was that again?
Yeah. It's so
they're like, come on, you promised me this and that, right?
Yeah. My process is I handwrite shorthand notes while I'm there. And then that night or that next morning, I actually type it up longhand, being as descriptive as I can. So hopefully I can make sense of what it is. And then with some of my the students that have been with me for a long time, we try and get together on the side after those kind of events to kind of review everything to make sure it's still fresh in my brain. And then, just try and spread it out. Like I sprinkle it throughout the classes, like along with the rest of the stuff that we normally teach as kind of like a fun new thing for people to work on so that it stays fresh in my head as well. But yeah, that's always the hard part is you get further and further away from these things and you look back at your notes, you're like, oh shoot, I knew what that meant, a month ago, and now I'm second guessing myself. So that's when I send you texts and like,
that's right.
what was that we worked on again?
Right. And then hopefully I'm not what you talking about, Willis. I'm like, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
I've gotten some. It is interesting how people interpret things. Because I do get something, questions from people that said, hey, what was this thing? And I'm thinking, what is it you're describing? That's really interesting. And then I kind of catch on to it eventually and go, oh, do you mean this thing? And they're like, oh, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's interesting way to describe it, but I mean, it's accurate, but just
Yeah,
different way than how I would think to describe it, I guess. And so the
yeah.
communication is a puzzle, and it gets. I mean, I find that part kind of fun myself, but that's the communication major in me.
Sure. I mean, we all have different filters that that information goes through as it's coming into our brain, and that kind of colors the information. And sometimes it completely changes it. So, you could have you and your
Yeah,
partner could be watching a demonstration and they see something completely different than you see. And now you're like, wait, which one was it?
yeah,
So yeah, it could be tricky.
yeah. That's actually really a fun thing, and I'll admit, like John Maidmont and I kind of do that. We'll sit back and we'll watch a large group of people like that, and we'll see the demo. We listen to what Guru says, and sometimes what he's asking for is not exactly what the demo is. And then we watch
Mm,
how it disseminates into a large group of people, and we go, okay, who got what out of this? And we're kind of watching them practice, going, okay, that's it's interesting, just looking at communication in the game of telephone and how all that works, and then how people are practicing what they think they saw or think they got, and it's interesting. It's just different versions of something, really, in the end, but it really does get quite interesting.
oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, no, it is like I think it's also how late in the day is it? How much coffee have we had?
Yeah,
How
that's
how
right. Yeah,
how much is our brain still functioning? And
right.
we all get susceptible to that. And I think that helps me at least with teaching and trying to be a little bit more understanding of students when you're trying to teach a new part of the class, and you see a handful of them are just completely spaced out, and it's like, okay, that happens to me too. So I'm going to be compassionate about this and understand. And I
Right.
know that, like, when I say 1, 2, 3, go, I'm going to have to go over to that group because they're going to be like, wait, what are we doing again? But that happens to all of us. So it's like, you just have to
Right.
understand that's part of the process.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think it's the kids class that prepares me for that, because I don't know how many times you go over and then you just got two of them walk over you. We need help. I'm like, okay, well, what you know start. Let me see where you're at, and they don't even
Yeah.
know where to start. I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
okay,
Oh,
okay,
yeah.
here we go.
Yeah. Yeah. And then it's like, for a fact that they weren't paying attention. They were
Yeah,
daydreaming or
exactly,
whatever.
100%,
Yeah.
hundred
Oh,
percent.
yeah.
But I'm not going to yell at the little creatures. They're too cute, so I can't yell at them. I got to
That's a
go
good
help
thing. That's a good thing.
them. Indeed. Well, David, tell us how you got started in martial arts. What got you interested, and then why, when, where, and how did you start?
Sure. I started in like at the end of middle school, beginning of like high school. It was something that like I always was interested in. And it's like kind of cliche, I guess, but it's like growing up watching Kung Fu theater and Bruce Lee movies and all that kind of stuff. And
What are you
old,
talking about? That's a unique story. I've never heard that.
yeah, I know, right? It's You've never heard anyone give you this kind of backstory
That's
before.
right.
All right. um, but that's what got me into it, and it took me a long time to convince my parents that I wouldn't use it for the forces of evil and beat up my
For
younger
the forces of
siblings.
evil. Oh
Right?
man,
Yeah.
yeah.
I'm being dramatic, but I finally got convinced them.
That's what it
Around.
feels like though when they're giving you the grief about it. You're like,
Yep.
come
Yep.
on, I'm not in the Legion of Doom. What's going on here?
Yeah, it's like, yeah, I think they were worried that like I'd turn it against my siblings or something, which never happened. But um, yeah, so I think the statement was, as long as you promise to keep your feet on the floor, you can continue to take lessons, is what it
Wow.
was. So
Okay.
me, they were just trying to make sure that they were making the right choice, which ultimately turned out to be a very good decision. And so yeah, I started in around early high school. That was like 90, early 90s, late 80s, and
Hmm.
was doing Kempo. Um, it was a Tracy's karate, which was technically like a American Kempo, like Ed Parker style Kempo.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And it was interesting because back then it was very different. They didn't have, at least where I was going, it was a small studio, and they didn't have group classes. Everything was one on one, and
Oh
the
really?
Yeah,
Wow.
that's how he ran his organization. And so you'd go in, and the only group classes were like sparring classes where people would come in and do like sparring, because they had another gentleman there who was teaching some judo and some kickboxing and stuff. So yeah, so started in like Kempo, mainly again, like I said, from the, watching all these Kung Fu movies and thinking that was so cool. And that they are the ones who got me interested in JKD and like a lot of the other stuff that I kind of grew into, because they had like a little reading library there, and they'd let you kind of
Hmm.
borrow books, and they had the Tao of Jeet Kune Do, and they're like, oh, you should really read this if you're really interested in learning more, about Jeet Kune Do. And so took that home, devoured it, and then would start collecting magazines and seeing articles about it in Black Belt Magazine and Inside Kung Fu, and um, going to the bookstore and trying to find whatever books I could find on it back then. And yeah, so continued doing that. All the way until I graduated from high school. And I think it was that summer before I started college, I decided to go do some traveling and went to Pennsylvania to, I think it was Don Guerin's school in Pennsylvania.
Hmm.
He would bring out, I'd get these flyers. I somehow got on, I think I put myself on his mailing list somehow, and got a flyer for a Guru Dan Inosanto seminar out there. Like, gosh, that was like 93 maybe. Um,
Wow.
and so I, as a like high school senior, I basically drove myself out there to the middle of Pennsylvania, not knowing anything about this stuff and not knowing anyone, but I was really fascinated by it. And that was my first experience. And it was like a super positive one, like being kind of like a somewhat of a shy kid, like very much an introverted kid. That was like a big step for me. And
Hmm.
the people there were like really nice. I got partnered with someone who had been doing it for quite a long time and ran his own school, and he was just really nice and kind of showed me the ins and outs. And we were working
Wow.
on like inward guntings and stuff like that, and that was just blowing my mind. And a little bit of Kali and whatnot, so that was really cool. And then um
So you drove out there by yourself? It was just
yeah,
you?
yeah, just myself.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's a
Yep.
hell. That's a hell of a move. I mean, really.
Yeah. That's how I started everything. And then I went out and I did a camp that summer in Virginia, with, it was like a multidisciplinary camp, and with some original JKD people. Ted Wong
Hmm.
was there. I think it was Jerry Beasley, a few others, but then there was also like Bill Wallace and Joe Lewis were out there as well. So it was like
Oh,
a
wow.
3-day camp. And yeah, again, that was like senior and like just graduated from high school. And so I drove out there, did that for several days, where you get to do like little workshops with all the different instructors
Hmm.
for a certain period of time, and that was very cool. Um, and then also started. I think I started college that fall, but kept up with like taking trips on breaks. So I would go out to again out to Pennsylvania, Don Guerin's. That's where I saw Arjun Chai for the first time. That's where I saw Eric Paulson for the first time. And so that kind of started my journey with that whole network of instructors. And
Hmm.
because like back then there was no one teaching any of this stuff in Cleveland that I knew of. And
Hmm.
so I'd go to these seminars, gather information. In undergrad, I joined for my freshman year the Kung Fu Club, and it was
All
like,
right.
because there was nothing else really there, and they were teaching like, so they were teaching like a praying mantis style, and I was like, well, this is interesting. It's different. I'll try it. But the guy who
Yeah.
was running it also did some Kali, and also did some jujitsu, some Brazilian jujitsu. And this was back early 90s, or I guess no, so yeah, this was like 93, 94. And
Hmm.
so UFCs were just starting to occur,
Yeah.
and the
Yeah. Yeah.
Gracies, like that's all we knew about was, as far as jujitsu was the Gracies. And After my freshman year, the guy who ran it graduated and he handed the club on to me. And so myself and then two other guys that I met at school who had also done a lot of Kali and some Silat and some JKD and some Muay Thai, we kind of banded together and put all our information together. And we were still the Kung Fu club, but we were
See, you have to,
teaching,
because that's a cool name. Like, I
right?
would love to be part of the Kung Fu Club. I don't
Right.
even care what's going on in there. I just love the name.
So like it changed from praying mantis, and it literally back then I think it was like me and like one or two other people in this club, aside from the
Yeah.
instructor. And so then we took it over, and it basically we were coming up with all these different names, and we're like, we'll just keep it the Kung Fu Club. But we taught like basically everything that I still do now: JKD, Muay Thai, Kali, a little bit of Silat, and yeah, so that kind of kept me very active in it. And, we were teaching people who had no experience, and we had very minimal experience in it, but it was a way for us
Right.
to like continue to work on the things that we knew and everything. So, but yeah, during my time in undergrad at Ohio University, I would continue to travel on breaks to go try and see Guru Dan, to see Arjun Chai, to see Eric Paulson, and I was still doing seminars like as much as I could to kind of continue to learn things. And we got connected with Jeff Brown, who was out in Dayton, and back
Hmm.
then he was like really, really into Silat. So we'd have him come up and do a little bit of like a workshop for us to do some Silat and some Shuto and a little bit of Kali. Because one of the guys that ran the club with us was a student of his, again, back in the early mid 90s. And so, yeah, so it's kind of, that's how I got introduced to the whole Inosanto lineage and that umbrella. And that's kind of what directed me from that point on. And then on breaks from school, like winter breaks and summer breaks, at the time, I did not know anyone that was teaching like any of that stuff in the Cleveland area. So the best thing I could find was a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school. So I was doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu at a Gracie school that was under Hoist Gracie. So that was like during my break periods. We had a pretty long winter break and a decently long summer break. So I'd be doing jujitsu then, and then bring what I learned back to our club the next year, and we'd mix that into everything we were doing. And yeah, so that's kind of my start, and then it kind of just continued on from there.
Wow. Well, what a cool time period. I mean, like that 90s period was just amazing because I mean, you had, I think right when everything sort of came together, when the UFC was going on, which brought a lot of exposure to some new things, and then you still had all the kind of the old stuff around because it hadn't been like thrown away yet, by
Yeah.
people who just wanted to do UFC. There was a lot of kind of interesting stuff around at that time period
Yeah. Oh yeah. I
still.
mean, the clubs that were really big then were the Taekwondo club, like that was very popular. I mean, it still
Yeah.
is very popular. But there we had like I think there's a traditional karate club at our school. So it's there's a lot of those traditional arts were very popular back then. And
Yeah.
so it was almost like I I think there's a part of my brain that always looks for things that are a little bit, I don't want to say counterculture, but a little bit outside the norm. And I was looking at these tapes
Yeah.
of what like old VHS tapes of like these documentaries, these little documentaries they did on Guru Dan Inosanto, or little training tapes that we would find that somehow someone got a copy of. And it was just so
Right.
different than from everything else I was seeing that I was just fascinated by it.
Right.
And then I think his connection to Bruce Lee and all the reading that I did when I was just starting out really intrigued me, and so it's like very fascinating. But yeah, I think the other interesting thing that like in hindsight I didn't really know what I was missing. Um, Bondo, there was a Bondo group at our school
Oh,
because
that's right. You had Bondo out of
Dr.
Ohio. Dr. G was
Yep,
there.
Dr.
Yeah.
G was teaching there. He was a professor there. And at
Oh,
the
wow.
time, I had no idea who he was. And so I think my last year there, I did some Bondo because I just started to realize, oh, this is like like I knew Guru Dan had was working some Bando at the time, or it was starting to be kind of like recognized underneath the umbrella. And so that was one of the things I was like, oh man, like I had no idea this was even like a thing. Back then it was like the classes were kind of like, there was two different sort of classes. One was more of like a boxing style class that was labeled as Bondo with a little bit of kickboxing, and I was like, well, I don't really, boxing isn't what I wanted. But there was another group that was training that was doing more of the kickboxing style and some of the other, I guess, animal forms and whatnot.
Animal forms, yeah.
Yeah, and so I got to train a little bit with them in my last year, but I was like, oh man, had I known about this the whole time, there was this amazing resource right here, but this was, predates the internet. Like we were just getting the internet back then, so there's no way to like look these things up. It was just word of mouth.
Yeah, and it wasn't even on. It was like I remember looking at colleges back then, and it was just kind of because I was getting ready to go from junior college into university myself, and it was just like you'd grab a book because it was dial up. You'd type in a page and you go, okay, it's going to take it about 3-4 minutes to load. Let me read a little bit. Yeah. And you were fine with that. Now it takes more than 2 seconds to load something and you're cursing, but.
Yep. Yeah. So I kind of look back and I was like, oh, that was a missed opportunity, but in a sense it wasn't. And it's because like that really solidified the trajectory that I've kind of continued on the rest of my martial arts career. But yeah, so graduated from undergrad and moved back to Cleveland and started working there for a period of time. And I had my degree was in molecular biology, so I was working for a lab and was trying to figure out like, what am I going to do? Where am I going to continue to train? And I found I was still doing the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu very regularly, but it was, this was also the early UFC days when it was a different climate back then because the Gracie challenge was still a thing. And so we were a traditional Gracie gym. Like I got my blue belt directly from Hoist Gracie. And so there was still that rivalry between, we'd get like a Taekwondo guy coming into the gym or a Kung Fu guy coming into the gym that wanted to do like a challenge match. And it was weird. And my instructor at the time was like, he was all about that. And he was very traditional, old school Gracie Jiu-Jitsu. And so we would have these weird incidents where people would come
interruptions
and then like I was at the time one of the senior students there, and he's like, okay, I want you to really rough this guy up.
And this concludes the abbreviated version of the podcast. Please consider supporting the program by going to www.patreon.com/MALMAG and subscribing to the show. You can also purchase this individual episode or any individual episode at our Gumroad page. That's malmag.gumroad.com. Thank you for listening to this episode with David Hearst. Coming up next week, I sit down in Marina del Rey and I talk with the head of the Inosanto Academy's Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu program, Professor Gary Padilla. Our Malmag online store at martialartslifestylemagazine.com has a full selection of Timmy B's brand sticks for FMA and Krabiker Bong. Timmy B's brand now selling in Japan as well. Beautiful Timmy B's brand shirts and Dos Manos shirts are available with new t-shirt designs and more products coming soon. An online course in the Dos Manos method for FMA is available under the Courses tab. More courses coming soon. Check out the Places to Train tab to find schools near you, and click on the events calendar page to see what seminars and events are happening all around the world. And of course, visit our main page for articles on the martial arts. Music by Jack Al Relic. Martial Arts Lifestyle Magazine and the Martial Arts Lifestyle Podcast are trademarked and copyrighted by TNT LLC.